No one imagined that Mateo Rivera's life would change forever the day he crossed the border with a broken backpack, a pair of photographs, and a dream he could barely hold on to. But what no one knew, not even himself, was that inside a small, ruined room he would buy out of desperation, rested a secret that had remained hidden for years, waiting for exactly the wrong person. His story does not begin with luck or hope, but with a harsh blow that forced him to choose between giving up or facing the darkness that greeted him upon arriving in the United States. And it was that choice that opened the doors to the truth he was about to discover. Mateo had been walking for 3 days through unknown streets, with the cold clinging to his bones and fatigue that made him doubt his own decision. He had left behind his home in Monterey, along with the voices of those who told him that an undocumented immigrant was doomed to fail. Every step he took in that country was a reminder of the fear that had followed him since he dared to cross the border with nothing more than the promise of sending money to his sick mother. He didn't know where he would sleep that night, but he knew he couldn't go back. Now, after everything he had risked as he walked, his gaze lingered on every old advertisement glued to posts, offering cheap rooms that seemed more like traps than opportunities. Some spoke of rentals in neighborhoods where no one wanted to live, and others offered spaces so small they looked like boxes forgotten by time. Mateo wondered if any place in this country could give him a start that wouldn't destroy him before he began. However, necessity was stronger than his doubts, and his empty pocket didn't allow him to be demanding. He just needed a roof, even if only for one night. IT was then that he saw a yellow piece of paper stuck to a peeling wall, with barely legible letters that read, "Cheap room for sale. No questions asked. Cash payment." Mateo felt a chill, not because he distrusted the advertisement, but because he knew it was his only option. The place was in a forgotten neighborhood, where the houses seemed to have been holding secrets for decades that no one wanted to remember. Even so, something inside him told him he had to go. He couldn't keep wandering the streets without direction or destination. Upon arriving in the neighborhood, Mateo noticed that the windows of the houses were covered with old boards and that the streets remained silent, as if time had stopped just before something terrible happened. Shadows stretched over the pavement, while a dry wind stirred the remnants of leaves that had fallen long before his arrival. Every step he took echoed with an unsettling force, as if someone were watching him from some dark corner. Mateo took a deep breath, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. In front of him, a small house appeared, with faded paint and a rusty number barely hanging from a nail. From the outside, it looked more like an abandoned structure than a place where someone could live. However, it was the address on the paper. Mateo hesitated for a moment, feeling like he was about to enter an unexpected chapter of his life. The main door had deep marks, as if it had been hit repeatedly. Still, he needed a place, any place, and he knocked on the door cautiously. An elderly man opened the door slowly, showing a tired face, wrinkled by time and marked by distrust. His eyes seemed to measure Mateo with a coldness that made him take half a step back. When Mateo mentioned the advertisement, the man didn't ask questions, didn't ask for documents or references. He simply pointed down a dark hallway and muttered that the room was at the end, that if he wanted it, he could pay in cash and take the key immediately. That lack of interest made Mateo feel a knot in his stomach, but necessity spoke louder. The room was small, barely the size of a large closet, and the walls had stains that seemed to have been concealed with cheap paint. A smell of dampness and something older filled the air, as if time had decided not to enter there for years. There was an old bed, a broken desk, and a window covered with a wooden board. But the strangest thing was that, despite the obvious abandonment, someone had left a small lamp lit in the corner, as if that space had been waiting for Mateo. Mateo ran his hand over the surface of the desk and noticed it was covered with a thin layer of dust, but beneath that dust were marks, straight and deep lines, as if someone had tried to engrave something into the wood. When he got closer to observe them, a chill ran down his spine. The marks seemed to form words, but they were incomplete, like a message interrupted by force. Something inside him told him that this room was not simply abandoned. It had a history, and a history that was not meant for him. Despite the growing fear, Mateo decided to stay. He paid the little he had left the man and closed the door behind him, remaining alone inside the room that was now his new home. He sat on the bed and exhaled deeply, unaware that he had just entered a place where loneliness was not the only inhabitant. There, between those peeling walls, slept a secret that had been hidden for years, waiting to be found by hands that had nothing to lose. Mateo didn't know he was about to discover something that would change his life forever. That first night, Mateo could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard a distinct creak in the walls, as if the wood were trying to remember something that had lived long before his arrival. The wind seeped through the boarded-up window, producing a sound that resembled a long, deep whisper. Mateo tried to convince himself that they were just typical noises of an old house, but there was something in the atmosphere that prevented him from relaxing. The shadow of the lamp trembled on the floor, creating figures that seemed to move without his permission. The next morning, he woke up startled, without remembering exactly when he had fallen asleep. The light filtering through the cracks in the board cast a grayish tone on the room, making it seem even smaller. Mateo got up and noticed that the lamp, which should have been off because he had unplugged it, was lit. An immediate chill ran down the back of his neck. He checked the plug, convinced he might have made a mistake, but there it was, off the night before, lit upon waking. He tried to ignore the unsettling feeling and decided to go out and look for work. He walked for several blocks, offering his labor to anyone who would listen. He carried boxes, cleaned windows, picked up trash, anything that could give him a little money to eat. But while he worked, his mind kept returning to the room, especially to the lit lamp and the marks on the desk. It was as if the place didn't want to let him go completely, as if it had marked him in some way. Upon returning in the afternoon, he noticed that the room door was slightly ajar, something impossible because he himself had locked it before leaving. With his heart pounding hard, he pushed the door open slowly. The room was exactly as he had left it, except for one detail that made him stop dead in his tracks. On the bed was an old folder, covered in dust and tied with a worn rope. Mateo knew that folder wasn't there when he left. His fear grew, but so did his curiosity. He approached cautiously, touching the folder as if afraid it would fall apart between his fingers. The rope was so fragile that it practically broke with a simple tug. Inside, he found several yellowed sheets of paper, some with moisture stains, others torn at the corners. What caught his attention most was a black and white photograph of a young man with an intense gaze, standing right in front of the same house where Mateo was now living. At the bottom of the photo was a date marked more than 20 years ago. Mateo tried to read the notes accompanying the photograph, but many phrases were incomplete or blurred. However, there was one phrase he could clearly understand. "If anyone finds this, please do not trust him." That phrase hit him like a bucket of cold water. Who shouldn't he trust? The old man who sold him a room? Someone who lived there before? Or worse, someone who might still be nearby? The silence of the room became denser with every thought. With the folder still in his hands, Mateo heard a dry noise behind the wall, as if something had fallen on the other side. He remained motionless, holding his breath, hoping the sound wouldn't repeat. But there it was again, a soft knock, almost as if someone was tapping from inside the wall. Mateo took a step back, clinging to the folder as if it were a shield. He felt his heart beating so hard that the room seemed to shrink with every passing second. He gathered his courage and hit the wall with his open hand, trying to check if there was an animal trapped or if it was just his imagination. But upon touching the surface, he noticed something strange, a slight, almost imperceptible vibration, as if the wall had more than brick and wood. He ran his hand over the surface, and his fingers stopped at a point where the paint seemed thinner. There, underneath, he felt the shape of an edge, as if there were a hidden cover in the wall. His breathing accelerated. Mateo stepped back a little, trying to understand what all this meant. The man in the photo, the written phrase, the folder that appeared without explanation, the lit lamp, and now a wall that vibrated as if guarding something. Everything seemed too strange to be a coincidence. What happened here? He wondered quietly, feeling that the answer was closer than he would like. And for the first time since arriving in this country, he felt true fear, not for his immigration status, but for what he might find inside that room. He decided he had to investigate, but not that night. The accumulated fatigue and tension had left him on the verge of fainting. He hid the folder under the mattress, as if that could protect it or him, and firmly turned off the lamp. This time, he made sure to unplug it completely. He lay down looking at the ceiling, try and convince himself that nothing would turn on again without explanation. However, just as he began to close his eyes, the room seemed to fill with a silence so profound that it forced him to stay awake. Something was about to be revealed. The next morning, Mateo woke up startled, with a feeling that he hadn't slept for a single minute. His body was heavy, but what worried him most was that the silence of the room had changed. It was not the common silence of an empty space, but a dense silence, as if something was listening behind the walls. He sat up slowly and looked at the lamp, still unplugged, as if checking that it still obeyed normal laws. Although it was off, the feeling that something in the room was watching his movements did not disappear. He remembered the folder hidden under the mattress and took it out carefully. The photograph of the man appeared first, and Mateo held it for a few seconds, observing that fixed, serious, almost defiant gaze. It was strange, but seeing again, he felt as if that stranger was trying to warn him about something. The phrase written in the notes resonated in his mind over and over. Do not trust him. Mateo swallowed, trying to ignore the idea that perhaps that man was still involved in what was happening in the house, even decades after the photo was taken. Determined to understand what was going on, he approached the part of the wall where he had felt the vibration the day before. He ran his fingers slowly over the surface, pressing harder this time. The wall responded with a slight creak, a sound that did not seem to come from inside the structure, but from something hollow, as if there were a small space behind. Mateo took a deep breath, trying to calm the trembling in his hands. He felt he was one step away from discovering something that might scare him more than he already was. With the tip of the key, he began to scrape away the faded paint. The plaster came off easily, revealing a narrow, almost imperceptible line that formed a rectangular outline. Mateo realized that this was not part of the original construction. It was a hidden door, a small entrance concealed in the wall. His heart began to pound, mixing excitement and terror in equal measure. He wanted to stop, think better, but something stronger than his fear pushed him to continue. He pushed the supposed door, but it didn't move. It seemed sealed from within, as if someone had wanted to ensure that nothing could get in or out of that space. Mateo put both hands on it and pushed harder, feeling it would slowly creak, resisting opening a secret that had been buried for too long. His breathing quickened, and for a moment he thought he should stop, that perhaps opening that space would only bring consequences he was not prepared to face. Just as he was about to give up, he heard the soft knock behind the wall again, the same one that had worried him the day before. This time it was clearer, more direct, as if something was asking to be found, or as if someone was responding to his attempt to open the entrance. Mateo took several steps back, feeling a sudden chill run down his spine. That knock was not a structural noise or a trapped animal. It was something more, something that seemed to have intention. He approached slowly again, touching the surface with his fingertips. The vibration was more evident now, almost like the weak beat of a hidden heart. Mateo swallowed, trying to gather the courage to continue. He knew that the most sensible thing would be to leave the room and seek help, but he also knew that no one would believe the story of an undocumented immigrant who claimed to have heard knocks on an old wall. So he decided to continue alone, driven by a dangerous mixture of necessity and curiosity. With one last strong push, the wood gave way a couple of centimeters, letting out a smell of confinement, dampness, and stopped time. Mateo felt the air become heavier as the opening became more evident. He still couldn't see what was inside, but the absolute darkness of the space gave him an unsettling feeling, as if that hollow had been waiting for the presence of someone to open it after so many years. The tension in his hands and his shaky breathing revealed only half the fear that was invading him. He finally managed to open it enough to look inside. The first thing he saw was a small, narrow space, almost like a secret compartment. The place was covered in thick dust and cobwebs that seemed to have been undisturbed for decades. Mateo squinted, straining to see better in the darkness. There, at the bottom of the hollow, something had a faint glow. It wasn't a strong metallic reflection, but a weak glimmer, as if a small object was hidden and waiting to be discovered. He reached in carefully, putting a hand into narrow space, feeling the rough texture of the wood and the accumulated dust. His fingers finally touched something cold, a hard, polished surface. He took it gently and brought it out into the light of the room. It was a small metal box, the size of his palm, covered in marks dense and a worn lacquer from time. It had no visible lock, only a symbol engraved on the lid, a symbol Mateo had never seen before, but which awakened a deep, almost inexplicable feeling in him. At that moment, he knew his life had changed course again. Mateo held the small metal box between his hands, as if he feared it might crumble at the slightest movement. The symbol engraved on the lid looked like an abstract figure, formed by lines that crossed at strange angles, creating a shape he couldn't identify. The cold texture of the metal made a slight tingling sensation run through his fingers, as if this was not just an abandoned object, but something that still carried the energy of those who had touched it before. The silence in the room deepened. As if the air itself were holding its breath, he tried to open the box, but found no visible mechanism. There were no hinges, locks, or grooves. It was as if the metal had been molded around something and then completely sealed. Mateo pressed the lid hard, trying to force it, but it didn't move an inch. The absolute resistance made him think that it was not a common object, but something that, for some reason, had to remain closed. The question that tormented him was simple. Why would someone hide a box like this in the wall of such a small and deteriorated room? Looking for clues, he picked up the folder he had found on the bed the day before. He examined the papers more closely this time, looking for any reference to the symbol or the box. Among the wrinkled sheets, he found a loose note written in fast, nervous handwriting. It said, "What is in the box must not fall into the wrong hands. Do not repeat my mistake." Mateo felt his stomach turn. What mistake? Who had written that warning? And most importantly, why did it seem written with urgency, as if the person had been running away or fearing something? The photograph of the man called his attention again. Mateo placed it on the desk and observed it one more time. The face of that stranger had an intense expression, with a mixture of determination and fear that made him seem trapped between two impossible decisions. Behind him, the house looked exactly the same as it did now, as if time had not passed to that structure full of scars. Mateo wondered if that man had been the original owner of the room, or if he had lived through something that forced him to hide that box before disappearing from history. He decided he needed more light to examine the box. He took the lamp from the corner, plugged it in, and turned it on. The warm light illuminated the metal, revealing details that were previously overlooked. Small scratches, dark stains resembling burns, and a dented corner as if someone had tried to force it open. Mateo brought the lamp even closer, tilting it to see better, and noticed that on the bottom edge there was a very fine, almost invisible line, outlining what might be a hidden lid. There was the key. That edge had to open somehow. He tried pressing the sides, turning the box, sliding his fingers over the invisible grooves, but nothing worked. Every attempt increased his frustration, but also his determination. He couldn't stop thinking about the phrase on the paper. "Do not repeat my mistake." Those words sounded like a desperate warning from someone who had been in danger. Mateo felt an explosive mixture of adrenaline and fear, aware that he might be getting into something bigger than himself. Still, he couldn't stop. He had already discovered too much to turn back. While trying to understand the hidden mechanism, a new sound forced him to stop. A dry, brief knock, and then a scratch, as if something had been slowly dragged across the floor of the exterior hallway. Mateo held his breath. The sound did not come from the wall this time, but from the other side of the room's main door. He approached cautiously, pressing his ear to the wood, trying to distinguish if they were footsteps, voices, or simply the noise of the wind. However, the silence immediately returned, a silence so absolute that it made him tremble. He slowly retreated to the center of the room, still holding the box. The atmosphere felt colder, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped only in that space. He squeezed the lid hard, feeling the texture of the cold metal against his sweaty palms. Something inside him told him that the box was not empty, that it contained something of a deeper value than economic. He didn't know if it was sentimental, historical, or something completely different, but every second that passed increased the feeling that this box carried a greater weight than its size suggested. He decided he had to hide it before someone returned to the room or before something else strange happened. He lifted the mattress and placed it underneath, trying to ensure it didn't stick out or draw attention. Just as he let the mattress fall, a loud knock echoed through the wall, much more intense than the previous ones. Mateo jumped and froze, staring intently at the spot where he had previously found the opening. This time there was no doubt. Someone or something was trying to communicate from the other side. The room was breathing nervously with him. Not knowing what to do, he sat on the bed, tried to remain calm as his mind raced around all the strange events surrounding him. Each answer seemed to generate 10 more questions. Who had lived there? What did that symbol represent? Why was the box sealed and hidden? And what or who was causing those knocks inside the walls? Mateo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, sensing that the secret carried by that room was beginning to awaken. And he was right in the center of something that had remained hidden for too long. That night, Mateo decided not to turn off the lamp. After the knocks on the wall, and sensing someone moving outside his room, he didn't have the courage to stay completely in the dark. The warm light projected long shadows onto the peeling walls, shadows that seemed to breathe with him. He tried to distract himself by looking at the folder once more, but every time he saw the photograph of the unknown man, a knot of unease formed in his chest. There was something in that gaze that wouldn't leave him alone, as if that face held information he wasn't yet prepared to know. While reviewing the yellowed sheets, he found a phrase written on the back of one of them that he hadn't seen before. It said, "I tried to destroy it, but he wouldn't let me." The handwriting was shaky, hurried, clearly written under tension. Mateo felt his pulse quicken. Who was he? The man in the photo? Or someone else? The phrase seemed to be part of a longer message, but the rest of the text was torn, as if someone had tried to eliminate evidence. The feeling that he was reading the remnants of a dangerous story immediately intensified. He decided to examine the hollow in the wall again. He took the lamp and approached slowly, feeling the air grow colder as he got closer to the spot where he had found the box, illuminating the inside of the secret compartment. He noticed something he had overlooked before, a series of marks carved into the wood, thin lines that seemed to form a kind of rudimentary calendar. There were dozens of marks, as if someone had counted days in there. Mateo shivered, aware that this only made sense if someone had spent time hidden or trapped in that small space. He ran his hand over the marks, feeling the depth of each one. Some were made with the force of a desperate man. Others were weaker, almost as if the person had lost energy over time. Mateo immediately withdrew his hand, as if the wood could transmit the suffering of whoever had been there. Each new revelation made the room seem less like a refuge and more like a trap full of memories that didn't want to be forgotten. The weight of those marks began to crush him from within. Suddenly, he heard a soft noise behind him, like the creak of foot on the floor. Mateo turned quickly, but there was no one. The room was empty, just as silent and dark as before. However, the feeling of being watched from some invisible corner was too strong to ignore. He took a few steps back, keeping his eyes fixed on every shadow, every corner, every crack in the wall. Fear ran down his spine like an electric current. But even so, he couldn't abandon the idea that there was something else hidden in the room. He tried to calm down by breathing deeply and returned to the bed. He sat down slowly, feeling the mattress creak under his weight, as if the furniture was protesting having to endure so much tension. His mind returned to the sealed box. The symbol engraved on the lid burned in his memory, as if the image had locked itself in his head, without permission. Although he wouldn't admit it out loud, he felt that what was inside the box was connected to everything he had discovered. The photo, the notes, the marks on the wall, and the nightly knocks. He thought about fleeing the room, abandoning the place, and looking for work somewhere else where he could afford a cheap room, even if it was worse. But something inside him wouldn't let him. He had come to the United States with the intention of facing every obstacle in his way, and now that something truly strange was happening, he couldn't afford to turn his back and pretend nothing was going on. That impulse to stand firm gave him unexpected strength, almost as if his spirit clung to the hope of discovering the truth. It was then that the room shook again. A dry knock, much louder than the previous ones, echoed on the back wall. Mateo immediately stood up, feeling adrenaline rush through his entire body. It was not a weak or distant sound. It was a direct, deliberate knock, as if someone had used a fist or a heavy object to get his attention. His heart was beating so fast that he found it difficult to breathe. He knew he couldn't ignore it. Something was happening on the other side, something that demanded to be discovered. With slow but determined steps, he walked toward the wall where the knock came from. He placed the palm of his hand on it and felt a stronger vibration than before, a vibration that pulsed at irregular intervals, as if something inside the wall was trying to communicate. Mateo closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to open the wall completely or wait until he had more clues. But the knock repeated, this time accompanied by a weaker sound, almost similar to a choke breath. That was enough to force him to act. He took the lamp in one hand and the key in the other, ready to remove as much paint and plaster as possible to expose the interior. Each falling piece revealed more of the rectangular outline he had discovered before. The feeling of being about to find something forbidden grew with every second. He was sweating cold, but he didn't stop moving his hands. He was afraid, yes, but also had a desperate need to know what that wall was hiding. His life was no longer just that of an immigrant trying to survive. Now he was trapped in a mystery that was opening inch by inch in front of him. Mateo took a deep breath before tearing off the last fragment of plaster covering the hidden entrance. Each piece fell to the floor, raising fine dust that made his throat burn. But he didn't stop for a second. He knew that, after so many days full of fear and doubt, the time had come to face what that wall was hiding. The vibration became more intense, almost like an accelerated pulse coming from inside, forcing him to move faster than he himself could control. It was as if that mystery didn't want to wait any longer. When he finished clearing the surface, the small hidden door was completely exposed. It was no bigger than a window frame, built with old, dark wood that seemed to have absorbed moisture for years. Mateo ran his hand over the edge and felt a rough texture, marked by deep grooves that looked like they were made with fingernails or some sharp object. That made him step back. Had someone actually been in there at some point? Or had the wood simply aged in a strange way? He took another breath and pushed the door. It yielded slowly, emitting a prolonged creak that sounded like a repressed lament. As it opened just a few centimeters, a dense, ancient smell escaped from inside, a smell that was not just dampness, but something more, something he couldn't identify. Mateo held the lamp firmly and brought it close to the opening, letting the warm light filter in to illuminate the interior. What he saw at first had no defined shape, only compact shadows that seemed to overlap each other, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Little by little, the darkness began to recede. The first thing he distinguished was an old cloth, hung on the back wall like a kind of makeshift curtain. It was torn in several places, and its edges seemed burned. Mateo wondered if that was part of a makeshift shelter or an attempt to hide something deeper. Slowly, he stretched his hand toward the fabric, barely touching it with his fingertips. It was rough and fragile, as if it could disintegrate with a simple, sudden movement. On the other side of the opening, something caught his attention. A thin notebook, covered in dust and leaning against the base of the compartment. It had a worn leather cover and a thread, holding it closed. Mateo picked it up carefully, feeling his heart pounding against his chest with a force that almost hurt. That notebook was not a simple forgotten object. It had the same strange energy he had felt in the box. He placed it on the floor, next to the lamp, and took a deep breath before opening the first page. The first lines were written in a firm hand, although charged with tension. The text began, "If someone is reading this, it means he is still out there. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't protect what I hid here." Mateo felt his skin crawl. Who was the author referring to? What couldn't he stop? The following pages showed brief annotations, mixed with crossed-out phrases and hasty drawings of the same symbol engraved on the metal box. It was evident that this person had lived in fear for a long time. Mateo continued reading. The author repeatedly mentioned the word watcher and spoke of someone who appeared without making a sound and who knew every corner of the place, even when he wasn't there. He described it as a constant, silent, and observant presence, someone who did not belong to the house but inhabited it from the shadows. Mateo swallowed as his eyes scanned every sentence. He couldn't help but feel the room getting smaller, more oppressive, as if the author's past was beginning to mix with his own present. The diary also mentioned attempts to escape, desperate notes about whole nights listening to knocks on the wall, and warnings about not opening the box under any circumstances. The author claimed that what was inside was dangerous, that it had to remain sealed, and that it had been the cause of a tragedy that had haunted him for years. Mateo felt his heart beating so fast that it seemed capable of breaking his chest. Uncertainty began to turn into real, deep, and paralyzing fear. Reaching the last legible page, he found a message that seemed to have been written in extreme haste. It said, "If he finds it, there will be no more warnings." That final sentence was accompanied by a dark stain, as if it had fallen on the paper while the author was writing. He didn't know if it was ink, moisture, or something else. Mateo slowly closed the notebook, feeling that every word had left traces in his mind. The silence in the room was so profound that he could hear his own agitated breathing. At that moment, the lamp flickered. It was a short flash, barely a second, but enough to make all his skin crawl suddenly. Mateo looked up at the darkness of the compartment and, for a fleeting instant, thought he saw a shadow move behind the torn cloth. A soft, almost imperceptible movement, as if something or someone had been waiting for him to find that diary. And for the first time since he arrived, Mateo understood that the real danger was not in the box. It was in the room with him. Mateo remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the dark opening behind the torn cloth. He didn't know if what he'd seen was real or a product of his exhaustion, but the feeling that he was not alone intensified to the point of becoming unbearable. He tried to convince himself that perhaps it had been a movement of the air, an illusion caused by the flickering light. But something inside him refused to believe that explanation. That hidden corner had too many signs, too many warnings, too many traces of someone who had lived there in constant fear. He took the lamp again, and this time held it with both hands to prevent it from trembling. With slow steps, he approached the compartment one more time. The light revealed only dust, old wood, and the torn fabric, but no human shadow. Even so, the feeling of being watched was so intense that Mateo felt a cold sweat run down his back. The atmosphere had become so thick that it seemed to compress his chest with every breath. It was as if the room had subtly changed shape, just enough to make him feel trapped. He decided to remove the cloth completely, thinking that perhaps behind it he would find more clues. He grabbed it firmly and tore it off. A pile of dust fell on him, forcing him to close his eyes for an instant. When he could finally see clearly, he discovered something that chilled him. On the back wall was a drawing made with charcoal, a completely dark human figure, faceless, without details, just a long, rigid silhouette with arms extended to its sides. The simple design conveyed an unsettling presence, almost as if the figure was waiting for him. Below the figure were more marks, horizontal lines arranged as if someone had been recording steps or movements. Some were accompanied by small, illegible annotations, probably written in the dark by trembling hands. Mateo understood that this drawing was not an ornament or a curiosity. It was a desperate attempt by the diary's author to represent the watcher he spoke of, an entity, a person, or something indefinable that had been observing from the shadows of that house for a long time. While examining the drawing, he heard a soft sound behind him, like a sigh very close to his ear. He turned immediately, raising the lamp like a shield, but there was no one. The room was still empty, but the air seemed to have changed direction. Mateo's heart raced so fast, he felt he might faint at any moment. It was impossible to distinguish whether the sounds came from inside the wall, the room, or his mind, but the feeling of being watched was now as clear as a firm weight on his shoulders. Not knowing what else to do, he decided to move away from the compartment. He sat on the bed, breathing with difficulty, feeling that each exhale was heavier than the last. The box was still under the mattress, and the diary was open on the floor, with words that seemed to move in his mind even when he wasn't reading them. Everything he had found pointed to a single fact. The author of the notebook had lived in terror, pursued by a presence that did not want to be discovered. And now that presence seemed to have awakened with Mateo's arrival, he remembered the final phrase in the diary. If he finds it, there will be no more warnings. He didn't know exactly what it referred to, but the phrase repeated in his head like an insistent echo. Was it the box? Was it the diary? Or was it the room itself that contained something that should not be revealed? The possibilities overwhelmed him, each more dangerous than the last. The idea that that shadow had waited for his arrival caused him a fear so deep that he could barely stay seated. Suddenly, the lamp light flickered again. This time it was not a faint flash, but a prolonged tremor that left the room in semi-darkness for several seconds. Mateo clenched his teeth, feeling panic threatened to overwhelm him. The lamp regained its strength, but something had changed in the atmosphere. An intense cold settled in the room, as if someone had opened a door to the night. Mateo noticed his own breath in the air, forming a faint vapor that betrayed the abrupt drop in temperature. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable, coming from a wall. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't a scratch. It was a low, broken voice that seemed to pronounce his name. Mateo felt the world stop. The whisper repeated, this time clearer, as if someone was on the other side, calling him with desperate urgency. He backed away a step, but the sound continued, turning into an unsettling repetition of his name, pronounced in a way he had never heard before, a mixture of plea and warning. Unable to contain the trembling in his hands, Mateo grabbed the edge of the bed to keep from falling. The whispers became more intense, more pressing, as if the wall wanted to tear him from his place and force him closer. In that instant, he understood that the secret hidden in that house did not only belong to the past. It was alive, active, waiting for someone capable of listening. And he, undocumented, penniless, and without a single safe place to go, had been the unfortunate one who opened the right door at the wrong time. Mateo gathered the little courage he had left and slowly approached the wall from where the whispers came. Every step seemed like a dangerous decision, as if the floor itself could disappear beneath his feet at any moment. The voice continued repeating his name, sometimes clear, sometimes almost imperceptible, but always charged with an urgency that shook him to his core. He wanted to flee, open the door, and abandon the room forever, but something inside him refused to back down. He knew that, after coming this far, he could no longer escape the destiny that had found him. With the lamp trembling in his hand, he placed his palm on the cold surface of the wall. The vibration was more intense than ever, like an accelerated heartbeat that did not belong to any human being. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to understand whether the voice was calling him to save him or to trap him. When he opened them again, the shadow drawn inside the compartment seemed to move slightly, as if it had come to life under the light. Mateo immediately backed away, feeling his heart pounding against his ribs with unbearable force. To that moment, the mattress behind him creaked. Mateo turned quickly and saw the edge of the mattress lift just a few centimeters, as if something underneath was moving. Fear paralyzed him. He had forgotten the box under the mattress. He advanced cautiously and lifted the mattress with both hands, revealing the metal box that shone under the light as if breathing on its own. The symbol engraved on the lid seemed deeper, more marked, as if someone had pressed it from within. The box began to emit a subtle sound, a faint hum that grew slowly, vibrating as if it were reacting to the whispers in the wall. Mateo took it with trembling hands, feeling the vibration transfer to his skin, traveling up his arms like a cold current. The voice behind the wall changed, stopping the pronunciation of his name to emit a longer, deeper sound, almost like a lament. It was a mixture of pain, warning, and desperation that made him squeeze the box harder. He remembered the words in the diary. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't protect what I hid here. Then he understood that the box was not a treasure or a valuable object, but a container. Something had been locked inside, something that should not get out. The vibration increased, and the box lid seemed to detach barely a millimeter, as if it wanted to open by itself. Mateo felt a panic, so deep he could barely breathe. He knew that if the box opened completely, nothing would ever be the same. Suddenly, the voice in the wall transformed into a choked scream, a sound so loud and heartbreaking that Mateo dropped the box to the floor. The scream lasted a few seconds and then died out, leaving the room plunged into absolute silence. The sound disappeared so abruptly that it seemed torn from the air by an invisible hand. Mateo fell to his knees, breathing with difficulty as he looked at the box stopped on the floor, motionless, as if it had never made a sound. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any previous noise. He got up with effort and approached the box, checking that the lid had closed completely again, leaving not a single visible gap. The symbol was still, engraved with the same cold and ancient force. Mateo finally understood that it was not he who had found the box. It was the box that had found him, and the presence behind the wall had tried to warn him before it was too late. He decided to put the box in his backpack, unable to leave it in the room, but aware that carrying it would only increase the danger. He looked one last time at the open compartment and saw the drawn shadow seem to slowly fade, erasing itself like a condemned footprint destined to repeat. Without looking back, he stumbled out of the room, with the feeling that every step away from that place was a liberation, but also the beginning of a new burden. Now he carried with him something that could change his life forever. And as Mateo walked through the empty streets, he understood that this was just the first chapter of something much bigger than himself. If you want to continue to discover what happened next, how his life changed, and what new secrets emerge on his path, I invite you to stay close. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to follow every step of this story that is far from over.